All right, everybody, this is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent, back at the airport. Early flight heading to Phoenix, Arizona. Today's headline from the New York Times. All the news fit to print, or the Gray Lady, or I don't know, there's a name there. Anyway, headline. Previously secret memo laid out strategy for Trump to overturn Biden's win. It's an interesting headline. We're going to stay pretty high level today. The interesting thing about this headline is the way that it characterizes what we're talking about. Previously secret. So let me see if I can reframe this as a way to make sense. Private legal advice offered to Donald Trump, protected by attorney-client privilege, now public and being discussed as evidence of a conspiracy. See how that kind of changes the way that information comes across? Previously secret memo laid out strategy for Trump to overturn Biden's win. A lawyer allied with Donald Trump first laid out a plot to use false slates of electors to subvert the 2020 election in a previously unknown internal campaign memo that prosecutors are portraying as a crucial link in how the Trump team's efforts evolved into a criminal conspiracy. They go on to talk a lot about the ins and outs of this indictment, the ins and outs of this purported conspiracy of Donald Trump and his team to try and basically steal the election. There's a little bit of he said, she said, in the sense that you can take general statements and frame them in a way that looks a certain way. And when you have a different ideological bent, you can take those same general statements and frame them to look differently. Let me offer an example. Hey, we need to pressure Mike Pence to make sure that the right votes are counted. That could be taken as, hey, we need to try and convince our vice president, acting as the president of the Senate, to illegally claim false votes as the real votes and therefore declare President Trump the winner. Well, that's bad. I think we all agree with that. But here's another way of putting that. Some states' votes are being contested. The entire premise of Donald Trump's efforts is the election was stolen, that there was fraud, that there was criminal conspiracy on the part of his political opponents to subvert the state elections. And therefore, if that's true, then the slates of electors going to DC to be counted by, they are the illicit votes because they are the fruit of a criminal conspiracy that defrauded the electoral process in that specific state. That's his allegation. If you look at the strategic situation, you have, after election, you have a team of people that are saying, we think that these states had corrupt elections, and we're going to challenge the results of these elections in court. Now, as we all know, none of those challenges succeeded. None of those states were overturned. Whether that's proper justice or miscarriage of justice is beside the point for this conversation. They were all eventually overturned. But at the time this conversation is happening, Donald Trump and his team are strategizing about how to successfully resolve this election. Because if you're standing from his position, just take a minute and put yourself in his shoes. He thinks he won the election. He thinks it was stolen from him. And if he can prove it was stolen from him, it's possible that the judiciary might overturn the results of that election and suggest and or enforce, again, there's a bunch of variables here, but basically say, no, Donald Trump should get the electoral votes from that state. But the way the Constitution is written, you need electors, a slate of electors appointed by that state to submit to Congress, these are the votes for Trump. So look at it this way. Let's take just one state. Let's take Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania went for Biden. Publicly, that was the announced election result, which means that according to the Constitution, on December 14th, when the Electoral College meets, the slate of electors from Pennsylvania cast their votes for Biden, which means when the vice president counts and ratifies the votes from the Electoral College on January 6th, he's going to see 12 votes or whatever it is for Pennsylvania, for Biden. But let's say between December 14th and January 6th, The Supreme Court comes in and says, hey, no, we've got all this fraud here. Again, just assuming facts, not in evidence. We've got all this fraud here. This is an election that cannot stand. It's overturned. It should go to Trump. But according to the Constitution, the only thing that the vice president can look at on January 6th are votes from the Electoral College that met on the 14th. So if that date is already passed, effectively what you've done is you've nullified 12 votes of Biden, but you don't give those votes to Trump because those electors have already voted for Biden. It's a cumbersome process, but this is the constitutional process using the Electoral College. So if you're aware of how all that works mechanically and you're a lawyer and you're working for Donald Trump, you should be able to put out a strategy, a conversation, legal advice, whatever you want to call it, where you say, listen, if we don't submit slates of electors, then we don't get those votes, even if the judiciary votes in our favor. As best I can tell from my perspective, I'm just a regular citizen, as near as I can tell, there's a whole lot of mind reading going on in these indictments. And we talked a little bit about this last week. But there's a lot of people that basically say Trump did this and he did it fraudulently. He lied to his supporters. He illegally conspired, whatever, without proving, I haven't seen much at least, evidence proving President Trump's intent, his state of mind. And these are state of mind crimes. Some things are not state of mind crimes. Reckless endangerment, manslaughter. If someone is killed because you're driving down the road recklessly, you can be charged with manslaughter. You can go to prison for killing somebody. And they don't need to prove your state of mind or your intent. First-degree murder is a state of mind crime. In other words, it's premeditated murder, so they need to show evidence that you planned ahead of time to commit that crime in order to prove first-degree murder. There are crimes in the law that are intent crimes and crimes that don't require you prove intent. Pretty much everything in this indictment requires that you prove intent in order to make it a crime. But I don't see a lot of evidence for that. And one of the reasons for that is that it's a very tough thing to prove, especially with Donald Trump. He's such a mercurial personality. He is so volatile in the way he presents himself, in the way he acts, in the way that he puts out thoughts and ideas and positions. He's so in the moment that what he intends shifts dramatically from day to day or even from hour to hour. So the simple truth is, when you look at these indictments, when you look at this New York Times article, when you look at the idea that we have these secret memos that are somehow now part of the court record, I don't know how, but I think it's fairly unprecedented to have such a huge amount of essentially attorney counsel that should be protected by attorney-client privilege just tossed into the record. I don't recall that happening before, but weird stuff happens around Donald Trump. Basically, this is a Rorschach test. If you think President Trump is an unfairly maligned, chaotic personality who probably won the election, but even if he didn't, was trying to do the right thing, then you see this indictment as a witch hunt because it's trying to prove things it can't prove. The intent question primarily. However, if you see Donald Trump as a criminal, as a bad guy, as someone trying to subvert the best things about our country, then you see this indictment as justice finally coming for this terrible human being that is threatening the country that you love. One of the things that's interesting as I've been thinking about over the years, why is it that only the controversial cases are highlighted when it comes to things like racial animus in policing and that? And it's because if it's a clear-cut case, then there's not a lot of room to try and sway people. There's not a lot of room to create emotionally volatile responses, to create emotionally resonant responses, rather, because the facts are not in dispute. There's an argument to be made that agitators, people who try and use current events to pursue their political means, whether rightly or wrongly, that agitators look for edge cases. They look for marginal cases. They look for cases where we're not entirely sure exactly what happened. And then they can use that ambiguity to inject their narrative. I think that's what we're looking at writ large here, because there's a little bit of ambiguity here, given the fact that we're talking about Donald Trump's state of mind, which is a chaotic place to be. Lots of room for ambiguity, lots of room for interpretation, which enables parties on both sides to inject their narrative into that ambiguity. So maybe we conclude we're being manipulated. The question is, who's manipulating you and why? Anyway, that's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.